Kristen Deandrade is an individual with a type of achondroplasia, which is a form of dwarfism. However, she's not let her little legs affect her from living her life to the fullest. She has written the memoir, Little Legs, Big Hearts, which she chronicles her journey and shows how much she has dealt with and how her perseverance, determination, and bravery have helped her face adversity in all different ways. For those that don't know, what is your achondroplasia?
Achondroplasia.
Yes. Sorry if I'm not saying that right.
That's okay.
And what is the disorder? It's a type of dwarfism. Are there other complications that go with this disorder?
Yeah, so achondroplasia is actually the most common form of dwarfism. It occurs in about between 26 to 40,000 births. And it is hereditary, meaning, if I were to have a child, I could pass it along to the child, but a lot of times it's actually a genetic mutation. So a child with dwarfism is actually born to average sized parents, which is what happened in my case. Both of my parents are average height and my brother's like 6'4". So, and then there's me. But achondroplasia is the most common form, and there's about over 200 different kinds of dwarfism, and they all range in, severity and all that. But achondroplasia specifically is a short-limbed dwarfism. So it's characterized by shorter arms and legs, specifically in the long bones. So your upper arms, and then your thighs and your lower legs. We also have really small hands and feet. I wear a size 2 children's shoe, which some people are like, oh my goodness, that's amazing. It must be so much cheaper. It is, except...
Is that even like a size 2? I mean, I'm a size 7, but I've never heard of a size 2.
Yeah, well, it's kids. But, at almost 35 years old, I don't exactly want to be wearing Barbie and Dora the Explorer. So there's that. No, and then in terms of complications, so those can be... It kind of varies between the individual. So growing up, when I was younger, I had a ton of ear infections, to the point where it was, like very common for my dad to have to drive me to the pediatrician at 9:00 at night because, my ear was starting to hurt. And I had tubes for that. And this is many, many people with achondroplasia specifically do deal with ear infections. The lower legs tend to be bowed, which then in turn can create a lot of joint pain. Same with we have limited range of motion in our elbows. There can be curvature of the spine. So I was braced when I was about 3 for kyphosis. And then I guess what I didn't realize is that things kind of tend to deteriorate as you become an adult. And that has led me to what I recently have been struggling with, and that's spinal stenosis, which is a narrowing of the spinal column. And I did not know how prevalent of an issue that this is just in the dwarfism community as a whole. Not even just achondroplasia. This is with, many different types of dwarfism. So yeah, it's, we deal with a lot.
No, it sounds like a lot. And how have you managed through the years? It must not have been easy.
Yeah, as a child, I think it's a little different. I was pretty oblivious to everything. I just saw myself as my peers. I wanted to play sports, and it really wasn't until I'd say, elementary school, maybe first grade was my real, negative interaction with other kids where they kind of singled me out because of my height. And that obviously gets more difficult as you get older because you're more aware of how society sees you, which is it's such a big problem, and I wish that I could say that, we could just change the way that society sees anyone with any differences, but it's gotten better. I think, especially with social media and the way that people are using it, it's gotten better, but it still is quite a struggle. And then obviously as an adult, it's hard. You think that you have to put on this suit of armor and just handle it. And sometimes things just come crashing down. And I've found that the best way to deal with it is to talk about it. And, again, society thinks that, you can't cry, you can't talk about the bad stuff, but that's really ultimately the way that, at least for me personally, and I don't think I'm only speaking for myself, but this is my point of view, talking about things really do make it better. And actually, when I was in third grade, we read a book about a little girl. Her name was Jamie, and she had achondroplasia in this book. And I was in a really large classroom. We had 50 kids in our class, 2 teachers and 50 kids. And my teachers were like, "Oh my gosh, Kristen, will you talk to the class about and how you relate to Jamie?" And I remember reading this book and thinking, oh, wait a second, we have so much in common. It was her having to use a stool to stand up at the sink, and and there were like differences in sports. She couldn't, when she was going to shoot a basketball, it was hard for her to reach the hoop. Little, big things and little things. And so I actually did a little presentation that we filmed for my third grade class. And from that point on, I remember thinking, that's how easy it is. Like, I just have to tell these kids that, I'm just like them. I'm just a little bit shorter. And then again, you realize that that's not the same for adults. You can tell an adult that, and unfortunately, and the media has a lot to do with this, how individuals with dwarfism are portrayed in the media. Has a direct influence on how society treats an individual with dwarfism.
Yeah, absolutely. Being different is definitely, it's a challenge sometimes, but it's also a gift.
Exactly.
Yeah. So how has being different, and I guess we spoke a little bit about this in my previous question, but being different, affected you, or has played some type of part in terms of how you look at other people that, that aren't as short as you and don't have dwarfism?
I mean, I think for anyone growing up in the face of adversity, we can all agree that at least I'm a lot more sensitive. I'm sensitive to anyone, whether it's someone with dwarfism or someone living with epilepsy, someone with, any physical difference. And I think that community of people living in the face of adversity, we're able to handle challenges with grace. And I will say, I've been dealt a pretty tough hand just recently in the last 4 years. And people are always like, "Oh my gosh, Kristen, like, how on earth? I don't know how you do it." And I remember reading somewhere, "Make your comeback stronger than your setback." And so that kind of, fueled me, and also made me realize that it's like the courage and the bravery to talk about what's going on and be open with it, which can make some people really uncomfortable, but it also makes other people realize, what's going on, and they can sometimes relate. We don't all oftentimes have an opportunity to talk about like the really dark things, the things that make us sad, the things that make us angry, the things that we're scared about. And so when I'm one of the first ones to maybe open up about something like this, people can relate and make a connection, and it's a really beautiful thing. And that kind of gives me then the determination to be like, okay, so I'm not the only one. This is what you're being dealt, and then you rise above it. And I am really grateful for that. I think it's just given me a completely different outlook on life. You know, I love finding enjoyment in just the littlest things, you know. And for me recently, it's just, you know, walking on the sidewalk and being able to put one foot in front of the other and smiling at someone that walks by. You know, that's a really beautiful thing. And then there's the frustrating days, and it's being okay with talking about that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, you know,
it's a combination of a lot of different.
It is.
Yeah. Do you have a support system in Florida? Like,
I do. One of the reasons that I have survived the last 4 years is because of the support system that I have here. And a bulk of it has been comprised of the medical team and a lot of the people who have helped me get back on my feet. And then because I was determined to make my comeback stronger than that setback, I kind of dove into a little bit of the community here. I have a yogic background. You know, I have my 200-hour certification, and during the recovery process from my more recent surgeries, I said, you know what, you have to go out there and you have to make an effort. You know, people aren't just going to show up at your doorstep and be like, hey, we want to be your friends. I had to make an effort. Mm-hmm. And I'm so glad that I did. I have some of the most amazing people in my life, and they're people that I can be very authentic and open with, which is really important. Mm-hmm. So yeah, Florida, as much as I said as a kid that it would be a place that I would only vacation and never live, Florida has kind of sort of become home.
No, it's great. My question really is that you did a lot of different medical procedures and whatnot. Mm-hmm. At the age of 12, you decided to do a limb lengthening procedure, which it seems like at first you were kind of hesitant about. So, you know, I guess kind of go through the rundown of your medical procedures and how they've helped you and, you know, so forth.
Yeah, so when I was younger, my mom was very proactive and had this massive folder and just kept any and all information that she could possibly find. You know, she knew that there were underlying medical issues that come along with achondroplasia, you know, the ear infections, like I mentioned, and then bowing of the lower legs, joint issues, knee instability. And slowly but surely, I started to experience some of that. And I used to see a doctor in Baltimore. His name was Dr. Kopitz, and he was a skeletal dysplasia expert. I mean, he was the #1 doctor, and he was phenomenal. I loved him so much. I look forward to going to see him every year. And he had even said, you know, you're going to require surgery at some point. And at that time, there was a lot of talk about new procedures that had come out for limb lengthening. And my mom started collecting information on that. We weren't really sure. You know, she pretty much put the ball into my court, both of my parents. You know, they said, here are your options. You're going to require surgery. You can either correct the bowing in your legs this way, or there's limb lengthening, which is going to correct the bowing in your legs. I would also lengthen my arms. It was going to help something called sway back. So it's, you know, I kind of walked with my butt sticking out. My mom used to call me bubble butt when I was little. That was my nickname. So kind. And so they essentially kind of left me in an open field, and I had, you know, I could choose which way I wanted to go. And I did my research, you know, and I was 12 years old, and I said, I think that the limb lengthening is for me. And many people, you know, there's so much controversy surrounding the limb lengthening procedures because it's cosmetic and people just want to do it to become taller. And that was not my motivation. You know, you look at struggles that individuals with dwarfism have, just, you know, the society and the world is built for, people who are 5 feet or taller. So public bathrooms, you know, getting up on a public toilet, it's not easy when you are 3'9", which is what I started at. Reaching light switches, just living an independent life. I'm not saying it's not doable. It absolutely is. Driving a car, you drive with pedal extensions. But I was looking also at my future in terms of medically. I knew that I had some issues with my lower legs and joints, and it was the right decision for me. So we found Dr. Paley also in Baltimore, Maryland at the time. And I underwent my first of 3 procedures. Now, this was back in 1998, so it's done much differently now. But when I had it done, I had external fixators on my lower legs. That was the first phase. And because bone is a living tissue, if you break it, it's going to regenerate. So what they do is they break the bone and then they support it on the outside with this external fixator. And slowly but surely, you pull the ends of the bone apart and it creates a gap. And then once you get your desired amount of new growth, the bone fills in. So when I lengthened my lower legs, I gained 6 inches of new bone growth. And then I lengthened my upper arms and I got 4 inches of new bone growth. And then I did my femurs, which was 5 inches of new bone growth. So from 1998 to 2001, I was in and out of the hospital, dedicated to my rehabilitation process with physical therapy. Was it easy? No, certainly not. But am I glad I did it? Yes. It's shaped me to be the woman that I am today. And I live independently. I drive a car. And up until 4 years ago, I have been pain-free, active. I was a yoga teacher and, living life. And then enter Dr. Feldman. So 4 years ago, I was living in Charleston, South Carolina at the time. And I actually lost feeling and sensation from my waist down. I had no idea what was going on. I made 2 separate trips to the emergency room because it actually happened twice, and they put me on steroids. It got better. And then because I just, I wasn't very educated, honestly, about spinal stenosis. It wasn't something that I had heard much about. I guess I didn't really realize that as I got older that I was going to be more susceptible to other issues as an individual with achondroplasia. And so I did get diagnosed with spinal stenosis, which essentially is a narrowing of the spinal column. And it compresses your spinal cord, which can be really scary. And unless you find a doctor who knows what they're doing and they are familiar with skeletal dysplasia, you can kind of dig yourself a pretty deep hole, which is essentially what I did. The doctors that I was seeing in South Carolina pretty much told me, go to physical therapy. There's not much that we can do for you. And thankfully, from the community that I have just from undergoing the limb lengthening procedures, and kind of being an advocate. I was not the first, but an early patient of Dr. Paley's who had successfully, completed the procedures. And I was pretty open with my story even back then. You build friendships. And ironically enough, 4 years ago, a girl who I became real good friends with, she just happened to reach out and she said, "Kristen, how are you?" And being a person who is honest about how I feel, I said, "Not good. Things are not good." And I told her, and she said, "Oh my goodness, there's a new doctor practicing with Dr. Paley," because Dr. Paley had moved to Florida. His name is Dr. Feldman. You should go see him. So we made an appointment. And by the time I got down here, I was sitting in the exam room and he looked at me and he said, what are you doing?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And he goes, "You're essentially paralyzed." That's how bad it was. And he was going off of an MRI that I had had a year and a half prior. And so then we get the new MRI. And I remember I was sitting in the Fort Lauderdale airport, flying back to Charleston, knowing all too well that I was going to be facing surgery. And he called me and he said, "It is much worse than we thought. You need to go home and you need to pack a bag and then do nothing." Because spinal stenosis can get so bad that it can affect your bowel and bladder. And he said, if you lose control of your bowel and bladder, you need to go to the emergency room and call me, because that's, that's not good. So within a week, I got back down to Florida and underwent the first of quite a few surgeries to get me back on my feet. After my first spinal fusion, I actually was paralyzed on my right side, and had to fight really, really hard to stay on my feet. And again, that's when I was saying, community is so, so important. And finding medical professionals who not only are skilled in what they do, specifically in skeletal dysplasia. You can't just go to a doctor. Our bodies are different. Anesthesiologists need to understand that our airways are shaped differently. And you have to find a team who is experienced. Not only that, but who they need to listen. There were times where I would go in and just say, something's not right. And thankfully, Dr. Feldman, his PAs were incredible. I mean, the physical therapists, they listened and they backed me. And so over the course of 4 years, it's been a long road. Healing is not linear, but I am on my own 2 feet. And after 12 surgeries, I just celebrated my 1-year anniversary of not having to go into the operating room. So that's a
congratulations.
Thank you. So yeah, it's been a lot. And and this doesn't happen to everyone. I realize that. I know individuals with achondroplasia who are professional athletes, and I think maybe they've had 1 or 2 surgeries their entire lives, which, goodness gracious, I'm envious, and that's amazing. And then there are those of us who face quite a few medical struggles. But going back to the limb lengthening, there is a huge controversy. Again, is it cosmetic? In my eyes, no. It improves a person's function. And that being said, are those surgeries for everyone? No. And I'm not going to sit here and tell someone who didn't undergo limb lengthening that they made the wrong decision, and it's a personal choice. But would I do it all over again? Yes, I would.
So inspiring.
Thank you.
No, really inspiring. I mean, you've overcome a lot. So you've obviously overcome and undergone X, Y, and Z procedures. Are there other procedures out there that people with dwarfism do undergo that you fortunately did not have to go? Or what other types of treatments are there? I mean, clearly it sounds obviously every person's dwarfism is different.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of different things that individuals deal with. I know sleep apnea is a real big one. So getting tonsils and adenoids removed as a child, which I did not have to do. And as you age, I know getting hip replacement, knee replacement, that kind of a thing. I have not faced that yet, knock on wood. The biggest one right now is that there has been research for a new growth drug, and it's made worldwide headlines, actually. And it came up, I want to say like a couple of years ago, where they just had started doing the research, and it was marketed as a drug that was going to make people taller, which initially I was kind of like, what, really? I don't know. And after, looking into it more, and they just actually published a newer article on it, and I didn't realize, but they've actually seen improvement with, less bowing of the lower legs, which essentially is going to have an impact on the joints. And the biggest one is it's affecting the way that the vertebrae in the spine are developing. So individuals can get spinal stenosis actually up in the cervical vertebrae. And with the new drugs, the drug trials, they're noticing that there's been the foramen magnum, which is right at the base of the skull, is bigger, it's wider. So there's less of a risk of compression. So, of course, as with anything, there's a lot of controversy, surrounding these drugs, because they're saying that it's going to eradicate dwarfism, which I think is a little over the top. Obviously, I'm so grateful for everything that, I've been able to undergo. But if there was something that was going to make, if I was to have a child with dwarfism and this was going to prevent them from having to undergo spine surgery, then yes, I would endorse it, and it's still it's in the early trials. But it is huge. It's a huge development, and, we'll see what happens. And I'm still learning, and I'm still doing research, but, it is really interesting. But as far as other medical procedures go, it varies, and it's based on the individual. And I have one out of over 200 different types of dwarfism. I have no idea. I can't speak for, all of these other people living with different forms, but I'm sure that there are various, medical complications that they endure and procedures that they have to undergo.
Right. Okay. That's a great answer. So with everything, obviously you've overcome a lot. But on a day-to-day basis, I mean, if any, like, are there physical obstacles that, you face?
I mean, right now, like I said, I just celebrated 1 year out of the OR. So I'm still honestly trying to drop into life in this new and improved, I call my body my soul suit. And now I'm like my very own lightning rod because I have a spinal fusion. So, it's not an easy adjustment. I'll be honest. It's tough. And I've learned that I have to take a multidisciplinary approach. Like, I have to honor my body. I have to honor my mind. So I do yoga, I kind of have to nourish my struggles with different things. I say move it or lose it. I work with a trainer. I'm learning to keep my body strong in a way that's safe. I meditate, because the major obstacle I feel like I face is society. It's still a problem. Yes, I underwent limb lengthening. I'm 4'10". And individuals, specifically with achondroplasia, we have particular facial features that people can still pick me out of a crowd. And unfortunately, people are still really cruel. And it's really hard sometimes with people who don't understand. They're like, Kristen, you can't let those things bother you. And to anyone who's ever told me that, I love you so much. And it's complete BS. It can hurt. You know what I mean? It's there was one time I was with a friend of mine, and she actually works at the Paley Institute that sees a lot of patients with, different forms of dwarfism, congenital limb deformities. And we were at dinner, and we were sitting outside, and this gentleman, I could see it coming. He was riding a bike, and he was riding towards me. So her back was to him. And I knew that he was going to say something. And as he's riding his bike by, he yelled midget, which is a very derogatory term for anyone in the dwarfism community. And it's times like that where I just have to kind of like close my eyes and take a deep breath, which is what I try to do. But my girlfriend was like, what? She had no idea that people, that this is an issue. And it is. Society has a lot of growing to do. They really do. And it's not just individuals with dwarfism. I look at people with Down syndrome and the use of the R word, like, just eradicate that, get rid of it. It's just, we don't need that in our vocabulary. They're human beings. We're all human beings. We have feelings. We have a right to be able to sit in a restaurant, walk down the sidewalk, and just be who we are. I feel like when I'm not getting in my own way, society is my biggest obstacle.
Right.
There.
No, I mean, society is difficult, and not everyone's going to be nice, unfortunately.
No.
Call you weird, this and that, unless you're a professional who treats mental health, or you're an individual who has or has had mental health issues. Many people don't understand, and this is a problem, and go and be a mental health advocate or do online volunteering and understand us.
Yeah. It's actually really interesting that you bring that up, because a few weeks ago, I had a really big bout with actually both anxiety and depression, and it was sparked by an individual in the skeletal dysplasia community taking their own life. And I could not help but kind of put myself in their shoes for a moment, because I've been there. I'm not afraid to say it, and it's hard. It's the days that you're walking down the sidewalk and you feel like everyone is just looking at you, not as a person, but as someone, as a little person, or as a dwarf, or whatever, as the M word, because that's what a lot of people use. It wears on you.
Absolutely.
When you can't find, and it's getting better, but people are scared to talk about this. And I ironically enough just made a post also about making this conversation louder. And I was talking specifically in the dwarfism community.
Right.
Like, listen, we can't all walk around with a smile on our face like everything's fine. And I don't expect you to post these things on social media, but say something to someone if you're struggling.
Right.
Like, I don't have bad days every day, but I have bad days, and that's okay. And I couldn't believe when I, came out with this post about making the conversation louder, how many individuals simply messaged me and said, thank you. And for me, I kind of sat back for a second and I was like, I've never felt less alone. And now I'm trying to figure out where I can go with this, because I want to make this conversation louder. And I think that within separate communities, whether it's individuals living with epilepsy, individuals living with specifically anxiety and depression, we have to make these dark conversations louder. Absolutely. And, because we all have them. I mean,
why run scared?
Yeah. And my goodness, it's something that I am very passionate about. I don't know what it looks like yet, but honestly, I can thank a lot of people, and this is where social media actually plays a positive role, for individuals who are making the conversation loud, or they're loud with their, with their stories of dealing with different struggles. And I don't know if you're familiar with Glennon Doyle, the author. No. She's fabulous. And she recently released a new book, Untamed, but a lot of her writing, her first book, Carry On Warrior, it essentially was a book about her life. And we lead very different lives, but there were things that she said, and I was just like, yes, sister, preach. I like it. It was something that I could identify with. And, it's important to talk about it.
Absolutely. No, I mean, acceptance and, even accessibility is a big thing, in society now. And, hopefully within due time, acceptance will be, more and more like on the upfront, especially with work that you do, I do, and so forth. For sure. So as we've spoken about just recently, a lot of people are unfamiliar with what dwarfism is. It's not necessarily a disorder, medical condition that you come across on a regular basis. So for anyone watching, parents, caregivers, individuals, professionals, what do you want to say that dwarfism is not, and then what it is?
I think the biggest thing is that dwarfism, maybe not is not, but dwarfism does not define a person. You know, I felt for a long time that people tried to like fit me in a little box labeled dwarfism. You know, this is Kristen. She's a dwarf. I don't, you know, that no. My name is Kristen. I'm a woman. I'm a human being. I'm a yogi. I love to be active. I have dwarfism. You know, I feel like some people either allow people to define them by their dwarfism or they define themselves by their dwarfism, you know, almost creating limitations for themselves just because, again, how society views the, you know, the diagnosis. And it's not, you know, it should not, or it should not define a person. What is it? It's a condition, you know, it's something that you live with, but it shouldn't impact how you live your life. Yes, obviously it's going to influence it a little bit, you know, with the medical hurdles. But it's, you know, the best way I can describe it is if I am walking, you know, if I'm in the grocery store and I am walking down the aisle and I see someone coming towards me, and I used to do this all the time, I would see them look at me and I would say, oh my gosh, they see a little person. They see that I have dwarfism. And immediately it was almost like I was like creating this situation where they were staring at me, or like if they were to smile, they were smiling because they were laughing at me. Versus now, you know, I don't walk through a grocery store with, you know, thinking that I have this label over my head saying achondroplasia or dwarfism. I walk through the grocery store with a goal to get what's on my list, and that's it. Right. And not give in to all of the other temptations. You know what I mean? I want to live my life as Kristen, you know, a woman, yes, with dwarfism, but who's capable of so many things. And I think that's, I mean, at least that's something that I've dealt with for so long. And I still, you know, again, I have my days, and it's something that I work on, you know, it's my life's work. But if that's what I would say, especially to parents with children, and I see it so much now where they just treat their kids like kids. They let them, you know, they let them play sports and the kids go to school, and it's just, they are who they are. Yes, they have dwarfism. So what?
Yeah, so what?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, they're still a person and they're still capable of doing so many, you know, different and amazing things.
For sure. For sure.
Yeah. So you wrote a memoir, Little Legs, Big Heart, which is wonderful. What is your takeaway message to your readers, and what do you want them to, I guess, glean?
So for me, and again, this comes from community, I think that there is a lot of power in storytelling. And I don't mean, you know, Harry Potter. I mean your own personal story. It's been amazing for me, just even over the course of the last 4 years, to witness so many people sharing their stories with me. And it's a form of connection. You know, it's a way to feel less alone. Kind of like when I was saying, you know, I read Glennon Doyle's Carry On Warrior quite a few years ago, and it was just like, you know, our lives are so vastly different, yet there were so many similarities. So ever since that I had shared kind of a little bit of my story in 3rd grade, it was something that I became very passionate about, because if I was to just, you know, when I come out and just kind of lay it all on the table for people, because I go into schools and I speak to students, you know, it kind of eliminates the question. You know, I think that there's a lot of curiosity. And once that curiosity is eliminated, they're, you know, people are like, oh, she's Kristen. She lives with achondroplasia. She has dwarfism. She's been through, a bunch of surgeries, but she's just your average 34-year-old woman. And I think people can identify with struggles, and it was kind of funny. You said something when I had given my surgical history, that you've never had an extensive surgical history like that. And I always tell people, I'm like, don't, your story still has validity. Whether or not you have dwarfism and you've been through a bunch of different surgeries, or you deal with anxiety and depression, you can't say, oh, this person's worse off than me. I used to do that all the time, and I would just say, I would look at someone and just be like, oh my gosh, like, I'm lucky that I'm walking. But I was discrediting what I was actually going through and not really acknowledging that. So the memoir was a way for me to literally acknowledge everything that I went through as a child, and it goes up until I was 16. So it's basically a memoir of my childhood living with achondroplasia and then making the decision to undergo the surgeries. And it was a way for me to kind of just be able to fully identify with that. And then I told myself that if one person read that book and was able to take something away from it, that's all I needed. That was it. Because I feel as though connection comes from, the things that people don't want to talk about.
Absolutely.
And there's not a lot I leave out in my story.
That's really good. I mean, I think people that are more open get more benefit from being open, support, can be of all different kinds.
And for people who don't want to be open,
and that's okay too, but it's
for sure
not beneficial. It's not beneficial.
Yeah, but they can read maybe they read my story, a story, and they're able to identify and make connections that way. And maybe it gives them peace of mind. I don't know. But it has been really lovely, to get feedback from people saying thank you.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's probably the best thing that someone can receive, especially when you're giving back to people in any which way it may be.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to parents or any individual who has dwarfism?
Oh boy. I think the biggest thing would be, and I just was talking about this with someone the other day, I don't want to say no expectations, but I also do want to say don't have any expectations. You kind of, this is a hard question.
You can just give a general, you don't have to get into the specifics.
Yeah, what advice would I give? I think this goes back to just not letting a diagnosis get in the way of living your life. I would definitely say that to parents. And I guess to individuals living with dwarfism, specifically adults, I would go back to the advice to talk about it. And you have to be your own advocate, because again, I think for some, and this isn't all individuals, whether it's, medical issues or just a community, you want to find that community that's going to support you. And just not talking about the fluff, you gotta talk about everything. That's been really beneficial for me. And it hasn't been, my community isn't just of, other individuals living with dwarfism. It's everyone. People that I've found that are in my inner circle that I can talk to just about anything and everything, that are very accepting. Yeah, that's a hard question, honestly, because I feel like
you gave a great answer, though.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Because advice is going to be different for everyone. But I guess if I'm talking about myself, and I feel like if I was to put myself in my mom's shoes, it would be, exactly what I said.
Yeah.
Look beyond the diagnosis for sure.
It's great. It's a great piece of advice. So what resources are there for people looking for information on dwarfism? It can be organizations, it can be Facebook, pages.
I mean, yes. So again, I'm not a huge fan of social media for a lot of different reasons.
Okay.
But one of the biggest things that I am a fan of social media for is networking for things like this. There are countless Facebook groups. There's parents of little people, achondroplasia. I'm sure there's pseudo-achondroplasia. They have all different diagnoses that are Facebook groups. There's an amazing organization based in Spain called the Alpha Foundation. I was actually able to finally go visit them in last February. And they are phenomenal, and they provide resources to anyone. You don't just have to live in Spain. You don't have to live in Europe. They're a lovely organization. There's the LPA based here, Little People of America. And then, you have individuals like myself, I guess. And I know that you were talking about earlier, Peter Dinklage, who speak out about living, with achondroplasia or whatever form of dwarfism they have, which I feel as though, I kind of wish as a child that I had someone like that, a role model, like a good friend who kind of was there to pave the way. I did gain a friend. We went through our limb lengthening surgeries together. Her name's Monica. We still keep in touch to this day. And that was really special to be able to go through those procedures with, someone like that, who understood on all levels.
Right.
And I think now, specifically when it comes to medical treatment, and it's something that I am really passionate about today, is patient advocacy, and just you build these relationships with families, parents helping other parents, and then, kids helping other kids, kind of, ride the roller coaster of living with whatever condition you have. I think people are a really valuable resource. And then you've got, you have books, but social media, I will say, you have parents who will chronicle the life of their child, living with dwarfism. And there are also television shows. I think like Little People, Big World, that are, they place families living with dwarfism in a very positive light, just to show that, they're just like, you, and they're living their life. They're just, a little shorter.
Okay.
Yeah. And so it's, there are positive television shows also. And then you obviously have other people who chronicle their lives, adults with, living with dwarfism. But there are plenty of resources. I mean, if you type in skeletal dysplasia on the internet, my goodness gracious, there are lots and lots of resources. For sure.
Sounds good. You gave a great broad list, regardless. So
yeah. And I mean, obviously here in Florida, the Paley Institute, in terms of a medical facility, but I feel like, resources, you want a little bit of everything. It's not just going to revolve around medical treatment, it's like.
Yeah, because there's social, emotional, there's
everything.
All different types. So
for sure.
Yeah. Well, thank you. This was so fun. Your story is so inspiring.